Even the old media, both are rife with several fake news, and often facts, news get manipulated and produce a different sort of reality in front of us, and we get cajoled or duped by them, and we generate our opinion on the basis of that deception, that mass deception which happens through the manipulation of knowledge in the both new and old media. So Lyotard's theory on the postmodern condition is extremely pertinent in today's world. So to critique the contemporary society, which is governed by the owners of this commodified knowledge, Lyotard uses three important terms. The first is narratives, then metanarratives, and then grand narratives. So we have to understand these three terms very clearly. Now, narratives, according to Lyotard's notion, refer to the ways in which everything is comprehended in this world. So we know about a particular thing through the narratives which are related to it, which are circulated around it. Now you may ask me that if we look at a thing, if we gather knowledge about a thing, we know about that thing, but that's not true. Actually, when we look at a thing or we know about a particular thing, we are not knowing the thing in itself. We are actually knowing what is available in the domain of knowledge, which is accessible to us. Right? So we are not knowing the thing in itself. We cannot do that. We can only know about the particular thing in terms of the available resources, the available discourses which are related to that particular thing. And this very approach you would find in Kant himself, who would talk about the nominal and the phenomenal world. So phenomenal world is known to us and the nominal world is beyond our cognizance. So if you have any question, you can ask me, you can mail them to me, and I can try my best to reply to them, and or we can make a video also. I can make a video out of it, and I can circulate it if you want. So please let me know. You will find my email ID in the description of this video. So narratives, according to Lyotard, refer to the ways in which we know about the world, while metanarratives refer to the set of rules that legitimize certain narratives. So there are certain narratives, and in the Foucauldian sense they would be discourses, and probably metanarratives in the Foucauldian sense would be episteme. So I'm very grossly generalizing these terms for the sake of your understanding. They are not so simple, but for the sake of our understanding we can take them as I'm speaking of them now. So narratives are the things which enable us to know about the world, while metanarratives refer to the sets of rules that govern certain narratives, that legitimize certain narratives. So this narrative, this particular narrative is a legitimate narrative. Now, what is the rule that governs this? Suppose someone who is in power tells you that, well, this is it, this is what, like I am a teacher, and if I tell you that something is right, something is wrong, then these are all narratives actually. So the thing, the object A is right, object B is wrong. Now these are all narratives, and when you are believing in them, for the very fact that because I am telling you all these things, because I am your teacher and I am having a kind of legitimacy because of my position. So my positionality defines my legitimacy, the legitimacy of my narrative. Then definitely the meta-narrative would be the very set of rules that governs this particular narrative that I'm giving you. So I'm saying that object A is right, and if you're buying that, if you are thinking that this is a legitimate thing because my teacher says so, then the meta-narrative is actually my profession, my professional identity, my positionality, which is superior to the positionality of a student. I hope you're getting my point. So meta-narratives refers to the sets of rules that legitimize certain narratives. Now, for instance, our knowledge about space and the movement of stars, or the narrative of space and stars, is guided by the meta-narratives of astronomy that emerged in the 20th century. So what we know about the stars, about the space, about the movement of the stars, that is to say the narrative of space and stars, is actually guided by the meta-narratives of astronomy that emerged in the 20th century. So previously people used to know, or people used to have a different knowledge of the stars and the space, and their knowledge was governed or guided by the meta-narratives of the 19th century or even earlier, the 18th century. So this is how the meta-narratives, as they change, they continue to influence our knowledge. And the dominant narratives and meta-narratives of astronomy can ultimately be used to consolidate the contemporary grand narrative of progress and development in science. So now all these meta-narratives and the dominant narratives being legitimized by the meta-narratives would ultimately try to strengthen the contemporary grand narrative of progress and development in science. So as we would know about the stars in today's world, and this knowledge would be different from our earlier knowledge that we got in the earlier centuries, we would think also that this knowledge that we are having now is superior to the previous knowledge. And this very sense of superiority would give us a sense of progress and development especially in the domain of science. So in place of the emancipatory pursuits of science and technology, which the Enlightenment thinkers championed and the modern machine age promised to bring into effect, in the postmodern era, according to Lyotard, we see money as the only telos of scientific and technological advancements. So those who are owning the capital are still having the power to legitimize narratives, and hence whatever they are telling us, we are believing in them because they have the power to legitimize them. So for Lyotard, this marks an unprecedented collapse of the grand narrative of modernity that promised to free people from oppression and dogma. So you can see that as modernity tried to promise us that it is going to emancipate us from dogma, it is going to emancipate us from various sorts of oppression, be it religious, be it political, it would emancipate us, it would free us, it would make us free thinkers, it would make knowledge free. But actually, it is not doing so. And now it is time to question this grand narrative of modernity, which would give you the idea of progress, which would give you the idea of development, advancement. So the postmodern is a complex of cultural practices that emerged in the post-Second World War era as a response to postmodernity. So that is the condition of postmodernity, as we have found, seeing through Lyotardian lens. And the postmodern is a complex of cultural practices that emerged in this post-Second World War era, that is in the later half of the 20th century. And postmodernism primarily refers to the artistic movement that emerged as a part of those cultural practices. So the postmodern, when we are using this term, the postmodern, we are actually referring to a complex of cultural practices, including art, including everything. So culture is a whole way of life, according to Raymond Williams. So we have to take into account everything. And postmodernism primarily refers to the artistic movement, like modernism and modernity, if you understand it in this way. So go to that video in which I speak upon modernity, modern and modernism, the distinctions among these terms. You will find the link to this video in the top right corner of your screen by pressing the I button. Now, there are disputes on the very idea of the postmodern. In fact, there are postmodernisms, and there are even disputes regarding the very existence of the postmodern. So whether we are actually in the postmodern era or not, there are questions related to that. So here we have to think of Jürgen Habermas, the contemporary German philosopher, who is critical of the idea of postmodernism. And you can think of the famous debate between Jürgen Habermas and Jean-François Lyotard in this context, where Lyotard says that yes, we have arrived at the era of postmodernity, while Habermas would say no, modernity has been incomplete, and it is the goals of it were very noble, and those goals are to be fulfilled. So we have to continue the project of modernity. So he is critical of the idea of postmodernism. He is critical of the idea of the collapse of the grand narratives, as Lyotard would explain. So instead of that, Habermas says that modernity is an incomplete or ongoing project whose noble and emancipatory potentials are yet to be fully realized in the 20th century. So 20th century is the best time to realize, to actualize the noble emancipatory potential of modernity. So he is actually still an apologist of the Enlightenment principles, right? In some way. Though Habermas doesn't uncritically support the Enlightenment, we can say that he argues that modernity still needs to be continued because it has certain noble pursuits, certain noble goals which are yet to be fulfilled. And again, another philosopher, if we're thinking of the disputes on the very term postmodernism, is another French philosopher and cultural theorist, Jean Baudrillard. And according to Jean Baudrillard, the postmodern denotes an era that fails to distinguish between the real and the virtual. So the real, what is real and what is virtual, the very distinction between them, between the image and reality, between the signifier and the signified, if you think of Saussure, doesn't matter. For Baudrillard, the postmodern society has a terrible obsession with what he terms the third order simulacra. And if we try to understand the meaning of simulacra, it might be understood in this way, that it is about the imitations of imitations. And because of this obsession with this third order simulacra, according to Baudrillard, the postmodern society is fascinated by simulation and hyper-reality, where science of the real gets substituted by images. So there was a time when science used to take you to reality, used to denote reality. Now that era is no more with us. Now the images are replacing the very signs which used to represent reality.